In the unforgiving world of military special operations, respect isn't given, it's earned through blood, sweat, and unwavering determination. What happens when assumptions about rank and gender collide with the harsh reality of true leadership? Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected sources, and the strongest warriors aren't always the ones you'd expect. This is the story of how one woman's quiet strength shattered every preconceived notion about what it means to command respect in the world's most elite fighting forces.
And how a cocky Navy SEAL learned that true power doesn't always announce itself with the loudest voice.
The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete training facility at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. The air was thick with salt from the nearby Pacific Ocean and the unmistakable tension that always preceded joint training exercises.
Today was different from the usual SEAL team operations. Today, multiple Special Forces units would converge for a week-long intensive training program designed to test interagency cooperation and combat readiness. Lieutenant Jake Morrison adjusted his desert camouflage uniform and checked his gear one final time. At 28, he had already completed 3 deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, earning his trident and the respect of his teammates through countless hours of grueling training and real-world combat experience. His broad shoulders and confident stride reflected the pride he took in being part of the most elite naval fighting force in the world. The golden trident insignia on his chest wasn't just a badge, it was a symbol of his transformation from an ordinary man into something extraordinary. Jake had grown up in a small town in Montana, where military service was considered both an honor and a necessity for proving one's worth. His father had served in Vietnam, his grandfather in World War II, and the expectation had always been that Jake would continue the family tradition. But unlike his predecessors, Jake had set his sights higher than just regular military service. He wanted to be among the best of the best, and that meant becoming a Navy SEAL. The path hadn't been easy. Basic underwater demolition training had pushed him to his physical and mental limits. The infamous Hell Week had broken stronger men than him, but Jake had persevered through the freezing ocean surf, the endless physical punishment, and the psychological warfare designed to weed out those who didn't belong. Only 23% of his original class had made it through to graduation, and Jake wore that statistic like a badge of honor. Now, as he surveyed the training compound, Jake felt the familiar surge of confidence that came with knowing he belonged among the elite. The other SEALs around him moved with the same purposeful efficiency, each man a walking testament to the rigorous selection and training process that had forged them into America's premier special operations force. The training facility buzzed with activity as personnel from various branches and units began arriving. Jake recognized the distinctive green berets of Army Special Forces soldiers, the tan berets of Army Rangers, and the subdued uniforms of Delta Force operatives, who preferred to blend into the background. There were also Marines from Force Reconnaissance units, Air Force pararescue specialists, and intelligence officers from various agencies whose exact affiliations remained deliberately vague. What caught Jake's attention, however, was the small group of soldiers clustered near the main briefing building. Unlike the other units, this group seemed to carry themselves with a different kind of authority. Their uniforms were pristine but practical, their movements economical and purposeful. There was something about the way they surveyed their surroundings that suggested they were accustomed to being in charge, even in unfamiliar territory. Among this group was a woman who appeared to be in her early 30s. She was of average height with auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and she carried herself with a kind of quiet confidence that Jake had learned to associate with seasoned combat veterans. What struck him immediately was the lack of obvious rank insignia on her uniform. In the complex hierarchy of military special operations, rank was everything, and the absence of clear indicators was unusual. Jake's teammate, Petty Officer First Class Mike Rodriguez, nudged him with an elbow.
"Check out the diversity hire over there," Mike muttered under his breath, nodding toward the woman.
Bet she's some Pentagon desk jockey they sent to observe and write reports about how we need more sensitivity training. The comment drew chuckles from the other SEALs in their immediate vicinity. Jake found himself studying the woman more intently, making assumptions based on her gender and apparent lack of visible rank. In his experience, women in special operations environments typically fell into one of several categories: intelligence analysts, medical personnel, or administrative staff. The idea that she might be anything else hadn't seriously occurred to him. Probably a lieutenant or captain trying to make herself look important, Jake added, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure it might be overheard. You know how it is with these joint exercises. They always want to show how progressive they're being by including everyone. The woman in question seemed oblivious to their commentary, engaged as she was in what appeared to be a serious conversation with several high-ranking officers from different branches. Jake noticed that the other officers seemed to defer to her input, nodding seriously as she spoke, and asking follow-up questions with obvious respect. This observation should have given him pause, but Jake's preconceptions had already solidified. As the morning progressed, units began forming up for the opening briefing. The opportunity for casual conversation presented itself when one of the soldiers from her unit asked about the local training facilities.
You guys must be pretty excited to be training with the real deal,
Jake said, directing his comment toward the woman with a cocky grin. Hope you can keep up with how we do things around here. The woman turned to look at him, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp with intelligence.
I'm sure the experience will be educational for everyone involved,
she replied evenly. Jake interpreted her diplomatic response as confirmation of his assumptions about her role and experience level. Don't worry, he continued, his confidence growing. We'll make sure to explain anything that might be confusing. These exercises can be pretty intense if you're not used to real operational tempo. Several of Jake's teammates exchanged grins, clearly enjoying what they perceived as their leader's casual dominance of the conversation. The woman's companions, however, had gone very still, their expressions shifting to something that might have been amusement or anticipation. That's very considerate of you, the woman responded, her tone remaining professionally courteous.
I appreciate your concern for ensuring everyone can contribute effectively. Jake was about to make another comment when a voice boomed across the training area, calling all personnel to attention for the formal briefing. As units began moving toward the main building, Jake caught sight of something that made him pause.
When the woman turned to address one of her subordinates, Jake glimpsed what appeared to be some kind of insignia on her collar that he hadn't noticed before.
The briefing room was a large, sterile space designed to accommodate hundreds of military personnel.
Rows of folding chairs faced an elevated platform where senior officers would address the assembled forces. Jake and his team claimed seats in the middle section, positioning themselves where they could see everything while maintaining their casual air of superiority.
As the room filled with personnel from various units, Jake noticed an interesting dynamic beginning to emerge. Senior officers from different branches were taking their seats in the front rows, but there seemed to be some kind of informal hierarchy playing out in terms of seating arrangements.
The most senior personnel occupied the front row, with decreasing ranks filling in behind them. What caught Jake's attention was that the woman from earlier was moving toward the front of the room, but not to take a seat. Instead, she was walking onto the platform itself, joining the small group of officers who would apparently be conducting the briefing. This development sent a small flutter of uncertainty through Jake's confidence, but he pushed it aside.
There could be any number of explanations for her presence on the platform that didn't necessarily contradict his assumptions about her role and rank. A colonel from Army Special Operations Command called the room to attention, and several hundred of America's most elite warriors rose as one.
The formal portion of the briefing began with introductions of key personnel and an overview of the week's training objectives. As each senior officer was introduced, Jake paid careful attention to their ranks and qualifications, mentally cataloging the impressive credentials being recited. Then came the moment that would fundamentally alter Jake's understanding of military hierarchy and his own place within it. The colonel stepped to the microphone and began speaking in the formal cadence reserved for the most significant announcements. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce the officer who will be serving as overall mission commander for this joint exercise. Her operational experience spans multiple combat theaters, and her expertise in unconventional warfare operations has been instrumental in some of our most successful special operations missions. Please welcome Colonel Sarah Mitchell, commanding officer of the Army's most classified Special Operations Unit. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Colonel, not lieutenant, not captain, not some administrative observer, but a full colonel with command authority over everyone in the room, including Jake and his entire SEAL team.
What?
As Colonel Mitchell stepped forward to address the assembly, Jake felt his stomach drop as he realized the magnitude of his error. Colonel Mitchell's voice carried clearly across the silent room as she began outlining the training objectives and operational parameters. Her words were precise, professional, and demonstrated an intimate knowledge of special operations tactics that could only come from extensive real-world experience. She spoke about asymmetric warfare challenges, interagency coordination protocols, and threat assessment methodologies, with the casual expertise of someone who had lived these realities rather than simply studied them. As she continued speaking, Jake began to understand that his assumptions hadn't just been wrong, they had been catastrophically wrong. This wasn't just any colonel. She was the commanding officer of a unit so classified that even Jake, with his security clearance and special operations background, had only heard rumors about its existence.
She wasn't observing their training. They were participating in her training exercise. The realization brought with it a cascade of embarrassing memories from their earlier interaction.
What is this demand of error?
Every cocky comment, every condescending suggestion, every assumption he had made about her capabilities now seemed not just inappropriate but professionally mortifying. He had essentially patronized one of the most senior special operations officers in the entire military, treating her like a novice while she had maintained perfect professional composure despite his insulting behavior.
Jake's teammates were experiencing their own versions of this revelation, their earlier amusement transforming into horrified recognition of their collective mistake. Mike Rodriguez had gone pale, probably calculating how many regulations they had violated through their casual disrespect toward a senior officer.
The other SEALs were studiously avoiding eye contact with each other, each man dealing with his own embarrassment at having participated in what now seemed like an act of incredible professional stupidity. But Jake's ordeal was far from over.
As Colonel Mitchell continued her briefing, she began assigning specific roles and responsibilities to different units.
Her knowledge of each team's capabilities was comprehensive and detailed, suggesting that she had thoroughly researched every unit participating in the exercise.
When she began discussing the SEAL team's role in the upcoming scenarios, her eyes briefly met Jake's across the room, and he saw something in her expression that might have been amusement at his obvious discomfort. The briefing concluded with assignments for initial training rotations and logistics information. As personnel began filing out of the room, Jake found himself paralyzed with indecision. Professional protocol demanded that he approach Colonel Mitchell and apologize for his earlier behavior, but the prospect of drawing further attention to his mistake seemed equally mortifying. His SEAL training had prepared him for many challenging situations, but navigating the social and professional aftermath of having condescended to his commanding officer wasn't covered in any manual he had studied. Mike Rodriguez leaned over as they stood to leave.
"We're dead," he whispered. "She could have us written up for insubordination, disrespect to a superior officer, conduct unbecoming.
Our careers could be over." Jake knew his teammate was right. Military justice was swift and unforgiving when it came to violations of the chain of command, and they had committed their offense in front of witnesses from multiple units. If Colonel Mitchell chose to pursue disciplinary action, there would be no shortage of testimony to support her case.
The thought of facing a court-martial for something as stupid as making assumptions about a superior officer's rank made Jake feel physically sick.
As they moved toward the exit, Jake made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation he had developed. Instead of slinking away and hoping the incident would be forgotten, he broke away from his team and approached the platform where Colonel Mitchell was collecting her briefing materials.
"Colonel Mitchell?"
he said, his voice carrying none of its earlier cockiness. "Lieutenant Morrison, SEAL Team 5. I wanted to apologize for my comments earlier. They were completely inappropriate and unprofessional." Colonel Mitchell looked up from her papers, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she studied Jake's face, and he had the distinct impression that she was evaluating not just his words but his character. Finally, she nodded slightly. "Apology accepted, Lieutenant," she said simply. "I suggest you use this as a learning opportunity." The conversation was clearly over, but as Jake turned to leave, Colonel Mitchell added one more comment that would stay with him for years to come.
Lieutenant Morrison, in special operations, assumptions can get people killed.
I recommend you remember that during this week's training. As Jake rejoined his team, he understood that his education in military leadership had just begun, and that the lessons ahead would challenge every assumption he had ever made about strength, authority, and what it truly meant to be a warrior. The first day of training began before dawn with a 5-mile run along the beach, followed by calisthenics that would have challenged Olympic athletes. Jake had expected this kind of physical punishment, but what surprised him was seeing Colonel Mitchell leading from the front, matching pace with men half her age and showing no signs of strain as they completed exercise after exercise in the soft sand. Jake's team had always prided itself on physical superiority, and seeing their commanding officer keep pace with them should have been reassuring. Instead, it served as another reminder of how wrong his initial assessments had been.
As they moved through the morning routine, Jake found himself studying Colonel Mitchell's technique and form, looking for any weakness or sign that she was struggling to maintain the pace.
He found none. The morning physical training concluded with a brutal session in the surf, where teams were required to work together to move heavy logs through the breaking waves while maintaining formation. This was classic SEAL training methodology, designed to build team cohesion and mental toughness through shared suffering. Jake had assumed that Colonel Mitchell would observe this portion of the training from the dry sand, but once again she proved his assumptions wrong by wading into the surf alongside the teams. What followed was a masterclass in leadership under pressure.
As teams struggled with the unwieldy logs and the churning water, Colonel Mitchell moved between groups,
offering tactical suggestions and encouraging soldiers who were beginning to falter. Her voice carried clearly over the crash of waves, providing the kind of specific, actionable guidance that could only come from someone who had faced similar challenges many times before.
Jake watched as she approached a struggling Army Ranger team that was losing control of their log in the heavy surf. Instead of shouting orders from a safe distance, she positioned herself at the most dangerous point of their formation and helped them regain control through a combination of physical effort and tactical repositioning. The Rangers responded to her leadership immediately, their movements becoming more coordinated and effective under her direct guidance. When the surf training concluded, Jake's respect for Colonel Mitchell had grown considerably. But his embarrassment over their initial encounter remained acute. As teams gathered their equipment and prepared for the next phase of training, he overheard conversations between soldiers from other units that provided additional context for his mistake. "She's a legend in special operations circles," an Army Delta Force operator was explaining to a younger colleague.
Did 3 tours in Afghanistan running deep reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. They say she once walked out of Taliban territory with actionable intelligence that prevented a major attack on coalition forces.
Jake's teammate Mike Rodriguez had apparently been conducting his own research into Colonel Mitchell's background. "I talked to one of the Rangers who served under her in Syria," Mike reported quietly. He said she personally led the rescue mission that saved their entire unit when they got pinned down by ISIS forces. Purple Heart, Bronze Star with Valor, and about 6 other decorations I've never even heard of. The more Jake learned about Colonel Mitchell's military record, the more mortified he became about his behavior during their first meeting. She wasn't just any colonel. She was exactly the kind of combat-proven leader that Jake had always aspired to become. Her quiet confidence hadn't been an act or a front. It was the genuine article, earned through years of facing down the kind of dangers that turned ordinary soldiers into legends. The morning's revelations were just the beginning of what would become a week-long education in the difference between reputation and reality. As training progressed through various tactical scenarios, Jake began to understand that Colonel Mitchell's leadership style was fundamentally different from what he had experienced in his SEAL teams, but no less effective. Where SEAL culture emphasized aggressive confidence and overt displays of capability, Colonel Mitchell's approach was more subtle but equally demanding. She expected excellence without needing to announce her expectations loudly. Her instructions were clear and precise, delivered in a tone that suggested complete confidence that they would be followed correctly. When corrections were needed, she provided them in a way that educated rather than embarrassed, turning mistakes into learning opportunities rather than excuses for punishment. The first major tactical exercise took place in a mock urban environment designed to simulate the kind of complex multi-level combat scenarios that special operations forces encountered in real-world missions. Teams were tasked with clearing buildings, securing objectives, and coordinating with other units while under simulated enemy fire. It was exactly the kind of challenge that played to SEAL Team's strengths, and Jake felt confident that his unit would distinguish itself.
Colonel Mitchell positioned herself at the Tactical Operations Center, monitoring multiple video feeds and radio communications as teams moved through the exercise. From this central location, she could observe every aspect of the operation while providing real-time guidance and coordination between units.
Jake expected her to remain in this relatively safe position throughout the exercise, managing the operation from a distance like most senior officers. He was wrong again. 20 minutes into the exercise, Jake's team found themselves pinned down by simulated enemy fire in a narrow alleyway between 2 buildings. Their planned route to the objective had been blocked, and they were struggling to identify an alternative approach that wouldn't expose them to additional defensive positions. The situation was complicated by the presence of simulated civilians in the area, requiring them to balance speed and aggression with precision and restraint. Jake was studying his tactical map and trying to develop a new plan when a familiar voice came through his radio headset. "This is the data taking of checking out the data by U.S. commatchers today. SEAL Team 5, this is Mission Command. I'm moving to your location to provide direct tactical support." Before Jake could respond, Colonel Mitchell appeared at the entrance to their alley, having apparently moved through several blocks of hostile territory to reach their position. She was carrying a full combat load and showed no signs of having been slowed down by the gear or the tactical challenges of reaching them safely. "What's your assessment of the situation, Lieutenant?" she asked Jake, her voice calm despite the simulated gunfire echoing around them.
Jake quickly outlined their tactical dilemma, explaining the blocked routes and the civilian considerations that were limiting their options.
Colonel Mitchell listened intently, occasionally asking specific questions about enemy positions and the capabilities of adjacent friendly units. Her questions revealed a comprehensive understanding of the tactical situation that impressed Jake despite his lingering embarrassment about their relationship. "There's a drainage tunnel system that runs under this sector," Colonel Mitchell said after completing her assessment.
It's not on your standard maps, but I had the opportunity to study the complete infrastructure plans before we began. 2 of your team members can use the tunnels to flank the defensive position, while the rest of us provide covering fire from this location." Jake stared at her, momentarily speechless. The level of preparation she was describing went far beyond what he had expected from any commanding officer, regardless of rank or experience. She hadn't just studied the training scenario. She had memorized infrastructure details that might prove tactically relevant, preparing for contingencies that most officers would never have considered. The plan she proposed was both elegant and effective. By using intelligence that only she possessed, Colonel Mitchell had identified a solution that would allow them to complete their mission, while minimizing risk to both friendly forces and simulated civilians. It was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that separated great tactical leaders from merely competent ones. The execution of Colonel Mitchell's plan went flawlessly. Jake and his team followed her guidance precisely, using the tunnel system to outflank the enemy position while she coordinated covering fire from the remaining team members. The entire operation was completed in less than 10 minutes, with minimal simulated casualties and no civilian harm. As they secured the objective, Jake realized that he had just participated in one of the most professionally executed tactical operations of his military career. But Colonel Mitchell wasn't finished demonstrating her capabilities. As they moved toward the next objective, she continued to provide tactical insights that revealed layers of preparation and expertise that Jake was only beginning to appreciate. She knew the location of every defensive position in the training area, understood the capabilities and limitations of every piece of equipment they were using, and had apparently memorized the tactical preferences and standard operating procedures of every unit participating in the exercise.
The deputies officers decorating the exercise that seen by loss of patience and take over from conclusions to inventing in the failure by declaration.
More importantly, she was able to synthesize this information in real time to develop solutions to tactical problems as they arose. When an Army Ranger team became separated from their supporting unit, Colonel Mitchell immediately identified their location and directed Jake's SEALs to provide assistance. When equipment failures disrupted communication between units, she implemented backup coordination procedures that kept the entire operation moving forward smoothly. By the end of the first day's tactical exercises, Jake's understanding of military leadership had been fundamentally transformed. He had always associated effective command with the kind of vocal, aggressive style that was common in SEAL culture. Colonel Mitchell had demonstrated that true leadership could be quieter but no less powerful, more collaborative but equally demanding. That evening, as teams gathered for after-action reviews and planning sessions for the following day's training, Jake found himself studying Colonel Mitchell's interactions with personnel from different units. What he observed was a masterclass in adaptive leadership. With the aggressive SEAL personalities, she matched their energy and directness while maintaining clear authority. With the more formal Army personnel, she employed traditional military protocols while still encouraging innovative thinking. With the younger soldiers, regardless of their branch affiliation, she balanced mentorship with high expectations. Jake began to understand that Colonel Mitchell's effectiveness came not from imposing a single leadership style on everyone around her, but from her ability to communicate with different personalities and military cultures in ways that brought out their best performance. She wasn't trying to turn everyone into the same kind of soldier. She was trying to help each unit and individual maximize their unique capabilities while working effectively as part of a larger team. The realization was both humbling and inspiring. Jake had always thought of himself as a natural leader, someone who could take charge in difficult situations and guide his team to success. Watching Colonel Mitchell operate at a completely different level made him understand that he had been confusing confidence with competence, volume with authority. As the evening progressed, Jake found opportunities to observe Colonel Mitchell's planning process for the following day's exercises. She worked with a small staff of senior officers from different branches, but it was clear that she was the primary architect of the training scenarios they would face. Her approach was methodical and comprehensive, considering not just the tactical challenges but also the learning objectives for each participating unit. What impressed Jake most was her attention to individual development within the context of unit performance. She had clearly studied the personnel files and performance records of key individuals from each team, identifying specific areas where different soldiers could benefit from targeted challenges. The exercises she was designing weren't just generic training scenarios. They were customized learning experiences intended to push each participant beyond their current capabilities. Jake realized that his own performance during the day's exercises had probably been evaluated in this same systematic way. Colonel Mitchell had likely identified specific areas where he needed professional development, and the challenges he would face in the coming days would be designed to address those weaknesses while building on his existing strengths. The thought was both intimidating and exciting. If Colonel Mitchell believed he had potential for growth as a leader, Then the coming days would provide opportunities to develop capabilities he hadn't even known he lacked. But it would also mean facing challenges that would push him beyond his comfort zone and force him to question assumptions about leadership and teamwork that he had never examined critically. As the planning session concluded and personnel began dispersing to their quarters, Jake made another decision that surprised him. Instead of avoiding further interaction with Colonel Mitchell, he approached her with a direct question about the following day's training.
Colonel, I was wondering if you could provide some guidance about how I can better prepare my team for tomorrow's exercises, he said, his tone professional but lacking the defensive edge that had characterized their earlier interactions.
Colonel Mitchell looked up from the tactical map she was reviewing, and Jake thought he detected a slight smile at the corners of her eyes. "What specific areas do you think need the most work, Lieutenant?" The question forced Jake to engage in exactly the kind of honest self-assessment that he had been avoiding.
Rather than deflecting or making excuses, he found himself articulating genuine concerns about his team's performance and his own leadership decisions during the day's exercises. "I think we're sometimes too focused on completing the mission quickly rather than completing it correctly," Jake said after a moment of consideration. "We have the physical skills and tactical knowledge, but we might be lacking in patience and precision." Colonel Mitchell nodded approvingly. "That's a very insightful observation, Lieutenant. Speed is certainly important in special operations, but it should never come at the expense of thoroughness. Tomorrow's exercises will provide some opportunities to practice finding the right balance between urgency and accuracy." The brief conversation left Jake with much to consider as he made his way to his quarters. For the first time since arriving at the training facility, he felt like he was beginning to understand the real purpose of the week's activities. This wasn't just about testing existing capabilities, it was about identifying and addressing the gaps between current performance and true excellence. As he settled in for the night, Jake reflected on how much his perspective had changed in just one day. 24 hours earlier, he had been confident in his abilities and dismissive of anyone who didn't fit his preconceived notions about military leadership.
Now he was beginning to understand that real confidence came from continuous learning and honest self-assessment, while true leadership required the wisdom to recognize and learn from those who possessed greater knowledge and experience.
The week ahead would test more than just his tactical skills and physical endurance.
It would challenge his assumptions about strength, authority, and what it truly meant to be a warrior in America's special operations community. The second day of training brought weather that would have challenged even the most experienced special operations personnel.
A Pacific storm had moved inland overnight, bringing driving rain and winds that made communication difficult and movement treacherous. Jake woke to the sound of rain hammering against his barracks windows and wind that seemed to shake the entire building.
Most training exercises would have been canceled or postponed under such conditions, but Jake was beginning to understand that Colonel Mitchell's approach to leadership development didn't accommodate such conveniences. When teams gathered for the morning briefing, she appeared unfazed by the deteriorating weather conditions. "Today's exercises will proceed as planned," she announced to the assembled personnel. "Real-world operations don't pause for bad weather, and neither will our training. These conditions will provide an excellent opportunity to test your adaptability and resilience under adverse circumstances." Jake had experienced challenging weather during previous training exercises, but there was something about Colonel Mitchell's matter-of-fact delivery that suggested the day ahead would push them beyond their normal comfort zones. As teams began preparing their equipment for operations in the storm, he noticed that she was making the same preparations alongside everyone else, showing no intention of monitoring the exercises from indoor command centers.
The morning's tactical scenario involved a complex, multi-phase operation requiring different units to coordinate their movements across several miles of terrain while maintaining communication and supporting each other's objectives. Under normal conditions, it would have been challenging but manageable. In the driving rain with near-zero visibility, it became an exercise in adaptation and problem-solving that tested every aspect of their training and experience. Jake's team was tasked with conducting reconnaissance on a suspected enemy position while simultaneously providing overwatch for an Army Ranger unit that would be approaching the target from a different direction. The coordination required constant communication between units, precise navigation in difficult terrain, and the ability to adapt their plans as conditions changed throughout the operation. Within the first hour, Jake began to appreciate the educational value of Colonel Mitchell's decision to proceed despite the weather. The storm had eliminated many of the technological advantages that modern special operations forces took for granted. GPS signals were unreliable, radio communications were intermittent, and optical equipment was frequently rendered useless by rain and fog. Teams were forced to rely on fundamental skills that were sometimes overshadowed by high-tech capabilities in normal operations. Colonel Mitchell's voice came through the radio periodically, providing updates on overall mission status and tactical guidance as conditions evolved.
What impressed Jake was her ability to maintain situational awareness across multiple moving elements despite the communication challenges. She seemed to understand exactly where each team was located and what obstacles they were facing, even when radio contact was sporadic.
2 hours into the exercise, Jake's team encountered a significant problem. The route they had planned to their reconnaissance position had become impassable due to flash flooding in a normally dry creek bed. They could see their objective in the distance, but reaching it would require finding an alternative path through terrain that offered little cover and would expose them to observation from multiple directions. Jake studied his tactical maps and tried to identify options, but the topographical features that provided concealment were the same ones that were now flooded or rendered dangerous by the storm.
He was considering whether to request permission to abort the mission when Colonel Mitchell's voice came through his radio headset.
SEAL Team 5, this is Mission Command. I'm observing your situation from an elevated position approximately 800 meters to your northwest. I can provide guidance for an alternative route if you're interested in my assessment. Jake felt a moment of surprise at the realization that Colonel Mitchell had positioned herself where she could directly observe his team's situation. He had assumed she would be coordinating from a central command location, not moving through the same challenging terrain that was complicating his team's mission. Mission Command, this is SEAL Team 5. We would appreciate any guidance you can provide, Jake responded, setting aside any pride that might have prevented him from accepting help. What followed was a detailed set of navigation instructions that demonstrated Colonel Mitchell's intimate knowledge of the terrain and her ability to think tactically under pressure. She guided Jake's team through a route that used natural features for concealment while avoiding the flood-prone areas that had blocked their original path. Her directions were precise and clear, taking into account not just the geographical challenges but also the tactical considerations that would affect their mission success.
Following Colonel Mitchell's guidance, Jake's team reached their reconnaissance position on schedule and began gathering the intelligence required for the overall mission. As they settled into their overwatch positions, Jake realized that Colonel Mitchell's intervention had done more than just solve their immediate problem. She had demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking and terrain analysis that separated competent leaders from exceptional ones. But the day's lessons were far from over. As Jake's team conducted their reconnaissance, they observed the target area and provided updates to the approaching Ranger unit. The intelligence they gathered revealed that the simulated enemy position was more heavily defended than originally anticipated, with additional defensive positions that would complicate the Rangers' assault plan. Jake reported his observations to Mission Command, expecting to receive instructions to adjust their role in the operation. Instead, Colonel Mitchell's response challenged him to think beyond his immediate tactical responsibilities. SEAL Team 5, based on your reconnaissance, what recommendations would you make for modifying the overall assault plan? She asked. The question forced Jake to consider the broader tactical picture rather than just his team's specific mission. He had to analyze how the new intelligence affected not just his unit but all the friendly forces involved in the operation. It required thinking like a mission commander rather than just a team leader. After discussing the situation with his team members, Jake proposed a modification to the assault plan that would allow the Rangers to approach from a different direction while his SEALs provided diversionary fire from their current position. The plan would require precise timing and coordination, but it offered a better chance of success given the revised intelligence about enemy positions.
Solid tactical thinking, Lieutenant. Colonel Mitchell's voice came back through the radio. Implement your recommendation and coordinate directly with the Ranger team leader. Jake felt a surge of professional satisfaction at the approval. But more importantly, he recognized that Colonel Mitchell had just provided him with an opportunity to practice command decision-making at a level beyond his normal responsibilities.
Those big-time hosts would come back to the page of the coach written by the enemy's press of their own page.
She hadn't just told him what to do. She had encouraged him to develop and implement his own solution to the tactical challenge. The modified assault plan executed smoothly, with Jake's team and the Rangers working together to overcome the enhanced defensive positions. The success of the operation was particularly satisfying because it had required adaptation and creativity rather than just following predetermined procedures. Jake began to understand that Colonel Mitchell was using these exercises to teach problem-solving skills that would be essential for advancement to higher levels of military leadership. As the morning exercise concluded and teams regrouped for assessment and planning, Jake found himself looking forward to Colonel Mitchell's analysis of their performance. Her feedback sessions had quickly gained a reputation for being thorough, honest, and educational.
She didn't just identify what had gone right or wrong. She explained why specific decisions had been effective or problematic and how similar situations might be handled differently in the future. The after-action review took place in a large briefing room, where Colonel Mitchell had set up detailed displays showing the movement of all units throughout the exercise.
Using a combination of map overlays, timeline graphics, and communication transcripts, she walked through the entire operation step by step, highlighting both successful coordination and missed opportunities for improvement.
What impressed Jake about Colonel Mitchell's presentation was her ability to provide specific, actionable feedback to each unit while maintaining focus on overall mission effectiveness. She praised the Rangers for their adaptability in modifying their assault plan, commended Jake's SEALs for their initiative in proposing tactical alternatives, and recognized other units for various contributions to mission success. But she also identified areas where performance could have been better. Communication protocols had broken down at several points during the operation, resulting in missed opportunities for coordination between units. Navigation errors had cost time and exposed personnel to unnecessary risks. Equipment malfunctions had been handled well in some cases, but poorly in others.
Government data for sometimes is simply another.
The purpose of these exercises isn't to achieve perfect performance, Colonel Mitchell explained to the assembled personnel. It's to identify the difference between your current capabilities and the standards required for real-world mission success. Every mistake we make here is a lesson that could save lives in actual combat operations. Jake found himself taking detailed notes during Colonel Mitchell's presentation, recognizing that her analysis provided insights into special operations planning and execution that went far beyond what he had learned in his previous training and deployments. She was sharing the kind of operational wisdom that typically took years of experience to develop, condensing lessons learned from multiple combat deployments into practical guidance that could be immediately applied. The afternoon brought an entirely different type of challenge. Days prior to this is the first fly day. Instead of tactical operations, teams were tasked with what Colonel Mitchell called leadership rotation exercises.
Each team member, regardless of rank or experience level, would be given opportunities to command mixed units composed of personnel from different branches and specialties. Jake initially assumed that these exercises were designed primarily for the benefit of junior personnel who needed leadership experience.
He quickly discovered that even experienced leaders like himself had much to learn about commanding diverse groups with different training backgrounds, operational cultures, and communication styles. When Jake's turn came to command a mixed unit that included Army Rangers, Marine Force reconnaissance specialists, and Air Force pararescue personnel, he encountered challenges that his SEAL training hadn't prepared him for. Each group had different standard operating procedures, communication protocols, and tactical preferences. What worked well for coordinating SEAL teams was less effective when applied to personnel from other special operations communities. Colonel Mitchell observed these leadership exercises closely, moving between different groups to monitor how various commanders adapted their styles to work with unfamiliar personnel. Jake noticed that she seemed particularly interested in how leaders handled disagreements, communicated complex instructions, and maintained unit cohesion when working with people who hadn't trained together extensively.
During Jake's command rotation, his mixed unit was tasked with planning and executing a simulated hostage rescue operation in an urban environment. The scenario required precise coordination between different specialties, with each group contributing their unique capabilities to the overall mission success.
Jake had to learn quickly how to leverage the specific strengths of Rangers, Marines, and Air Force personnel while compensating for his unfamiliarity with their standard procedures. The planning phase revealed the complexity of commanding diverse special operations personnel. The Rangers advocated for a direct assault approach that emphasized speed and overwhelming force.
The Marines preferred a more methodical approach that prioritized precise control and minimized collateral damage risks. The Air Force pararescue specialists focused on medical considerations and casualty evacuation procedures that other units sometimes overlooked.
Jake found himself serving as more than just a commander. He had to function as a translator and negotiator, helping different groups understand each other's perspectives while building consensus around a unified plan. It required a different kind of leadership than he had practiced in his SEAL teams, where everyone shared similar training and tactical philosophy.
Colonel Mitchell's guidance during this phase was subtle but crucial. Rather than providing direct instructions, she asked probing questions that helped Jake identify potential problems with his planning process and communication approach.
Her questions forced him to think about leadership challenges that he had never considered before. How are you ensuring that each team understands not just their own role, but how their actions affect other teams? She asked during one planning session.
What backup communication procedures are you establishing in case primary methods fail? How will you maintain command and control if your unit becomes separated during the operation? These weren't just tactical questions. They were leadership development challenges that pushed Jake to think systematically about command responsibilities at levels beyond his previous experience. Colonel Mitchell was using the exercise to teach principles of senior military leadership that would be essential if Jake ever advanced to positions where he would command large, diverse units in real combat operations. The execution of the hostage rescue scenario provided additional learning opportunities. Jake's mixed unit performed well overall, but several communication breakdowns and coordination problems highlighted areas where his leadership approach needed refinement. Jake's and Jason is one of the most powerful states of South Carolina. What's the first hostage rescue scenario? Jake's and Jason is the book it's about history to afford possession of South Carolina. Jake's and Jason is the book it's about history.
The Rangers moved faster than expected, arriving at their assault position before other teams were ready to provide support. The Marines requested additional reconnaissance that delayed the overall timeline.
The Air Force personnel identified medical considerations that required last-minute changes to the extraction plan. Each of these challenges required real-time leadership decisions that tested Jake's ability to balance competing priorities while maintaining focus on mission objectives.
He had to make command decisions with incomplete information, adapt plans as situations evolved, and maintain unit morale when things didn't go according to original expectations. By the end of the afternoon's leadership exercises, Jake felt mentally exhausted in a way that was completely different from physical fatigue. The cognitive demands of commanding diverse personnel under challenging conditions had pushed his leadership capabilities to their limits. But he also felt a sense of professional growth that was both exciting and humbling.
During the evening's debriefing session, Colonel Mitchell provided detailed feedback on each leader's performance during the rotation exercises. Her analysis of Jake's command tenure was thorough and constructive, highlighting both successful decisions and areas for improvement.
Lieutenant Morrison demonstrated good instincts for building consensus among diverse personnel, she noted. His planning process effectively incorporated input from different specialties, and he showed flexibility in adapting his approach when original plans encountered obstacles. Areas for continued development include anticipating communication challenges in complex operations and developing more systematic approaches to risk assessment under time pressure. The feedback was exactly what Jake had come to expect from Colonel Mitchell: honest, specific, and focused on professional development rather than just performance evaluation.
She had identified strengths he hadn't recognized and pointed out weaknesses that he could work to address through continued training and experience.
As the second day of training concluded, Jake reflected on how much his understanding of military leadership had evolved since his arrival at the facility.
Colonel Mitchell had demonstrated that effective command required not just tactical competence and physical courage, but also emotional intelligence, adaptability, and the wisdom to recognize when others possessed knowledge and capabilities that could enhance mission success. More importantly, she had shown him that true leadership wasn't about imposing your will on others, but about creating conditions where everyone could contribute their best efforts towards shared objectives.
It was a lesson that would reshape his approach to command for the rest of his military career. The third day of training began with an unexpected announcement that would test everything Jake had learned about assumptions and leadership. Colonel Mitchell gathered all personnel before dawn for what she described as a real-world integration exercise that would differ significantly from the previous day's structured training scenarios.
Today's exercise will simulate an actual crisis response situation, she explained to the assembled teams.
You will receive mission briefings with incomplete information, face equipment failures and communication challenges, and be required to adapt your plans as new intelligence becomes available.
Most importantly, command authority will shift throughout the operation based on tactical expertise and situational requirements rather than traditional rank structure.
Jake felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension at this announcement.
The idea of command authority shifting based on expertise rather than rank represented a dramatic departure from normal military protocol. It suggested that Colonel Mitchell was preparing to test their ability to function in the kind of fluid, complex situations that characterized real special operations missions.
The morning briefing revealed an elaborate scenario involving a simulated terrorist attack on a civilian facility with multiple hostages, unknown numbers of attackers, and limited intelligence about the internal layout of the target building. Different units would be assigned primary responsibility for different phases of the operation, with command authority rotating as tactical priorities evolved. What made the exercise particularly challenging was Colonel Mitchell's decision to inject realistic complications throughout the operation. Radio communications would be intermittently jammed, simulating enemy electronic warfare capabilities.
Equipment failures would occur at unpredictable intervals, forcing teams to improvise with backup systems. Most significantly, new intelligence would be introduced throughout the mission, requiring continuous reassessment and plan modification.
Jake's SEAL team was initially assigned a supporting role in the operation, providing external security while Army Rangers and Delta Force operators conducted the primary assault. This represented a departure from typical mission structure, where SEALs would normally take the lead in complex close-quarters combat operations.
Jake recognized that Colonel Mitchell was deliberately challenging his team to excel in unfamiliar roles while supporting other units' primary missions. The first phase of the operation proceeded smoothly, with Jake's team establishing effective perimeter security around the target facility. Their position allowed them to observe the building's external features and monitor for any changes in the tactical situation. Jake found himself appreciating the different perspective that came from supporting rather than leading the primary mission effort.
30 minutes into the exercise, the first major complication arose.
The team designated to handle electronic surveillance and communication intercept reported equipment failures that eliminated their ability to monitor enemy communications or coordinate between assault teams.
This development threatened to compromise the entire operation by leaving assault forces without crucial intelligence support.
Colonel Mitchell's voice came through the radio with characteristic calm authority. All teams, we have a critical capability gap in electronic surveillance.
Command authority for intelligence coordination is shifting to the team best equipped to handle this requirement. Jake realized immediately that his SEAL team possessed the backup electronic warfare equipment and technical expertise needed to fill the intelligence gap.
But stepping into this role would require him to coordinate activities between multiple assault teams while maintaining his original perimeter security mission. It was exactly the kind of multi-dimensional leadership challenge that Colonel Mitchell seemed to specialize in creating.
Mission Command, this is SEAL Team 5.
We have the capability to assume intelligence coordination responsibilities while maintaining our security mission. Jake reported making a command decision that committed his team to significantly expanded responsibilities.
Acknowledged, SEAL Team 5. You have intelligence coordination authority.
All teams will report electronic intelligence requirements through your position and implement countermeasures based on your assessment, Colonel Mitchell responded. Within minutes, Jake found himself coordinating intelligence activities for an operation involving dozens of personnel from multiple special operations units.
His team members quickly deployed their electronic surveillance equipment while maintaining their security positions, demonstrating the kind of tactical flexibility that special operations training was designed to develop. The intelligence picture that emerged from Jake's electronic surveillance efforts revealed complications that would have compromised the original assault plan.
Enemy communications indicated additional defensive positions inside the facility and suggested that hostages were being moved between locations in response to the approaching rescue forces. This information required immediate tactical adjustments by the assault teams.
Jake faced a command decision that went beyond his normal responsibilities. The intelligence his team was gathering clearly indicated that the planned assault approach would likely result in casualties among both rescue forces and hostages.
But recommending changes to the assault plan meant challenging tactical decisions made by more senior officers from other units. Colonel Mitchell had emphasized that command authority would shift based on tactical expertise rather than rank. But actually implementing that principle required confidence and professional courage that Jake was still developing.
He studied the intelligence data one more time, consulted with his team members who were operating the surveillance equipment, and made a decision that reflected his growing understanding of leadership responsibility.
All assault teams, this is SEAL Team 5 with critical intelligence update. Jake announced over the tactical radio network.
Enemy communications indicate hostage locations have changed and additional defensive positions have been established. Recommend holding current positions while we develop modified assault plan based on current intelligence.
There was a moment of silence on the radio network that seemed to last much longer than it actually did. Jake had essentially overruled the tactical plans developed by senior officers from other units, basing his recommendation on intelligence that only his team could access.
If he was wrong, the consequences could affect the careers of everyone involved in the exercise. Colonel Mitchell's voice cut through the silence with immediate authority.
All teams implement SEAL Team 5's recommendation. Lieutenant Morrison, you have tactical coordination authority for plan modification based on your intelligence picture.
All assault team leaders will provide capability assessments to support your planning process.
The authority shift that Colonel Mitchell announced represented exactly the kind of flexible leadership structure that she had described in theory. Jake suddenly found himself responsible for coordinating tactical planning between Army Rangers, Delta Force operators, Marine Force reconnaissance specialists, and other elite units. Each team brought different capabilities and operational preferences to the mission, and Jake had to integrate their strengths into a coherent plan based on rapidly evolving intelligence.
The planning process that followed tested every leadership skill Jake had developed during his military career. He had to balance the aggressive, direct action preferences of the Rangers with the more methodical approach favored by Delta Force operators. Marine Force reconnaissance specialists advocated for extensive additional surveillance before proceeding, while Air Force pararescue personnel emphasized medical considerations and casualty evacuation planning. Jake's approach to building consensus among these diverse groups reflected lessons he had learned from observing Colonel Mitchell's leadership style. Instead of imposing his own tactical preferences, he focused on facilitating a collaborative planning process that drew on each unit's expertise while maintaining focus on mission objectives and hostage safety.
The modified assault plan that emerged from this collaborative effort was significantly more complex than the original approach, but it addressed the tactical challenges revealed by Jake's electronic surveillance. Multiple assault teams would approach from different directions, electronic countermeasures would be employed to disrupt enemy communications, and specialized medical teams would be positioned to provide immediate care for rescued hostages.
Executing the modified plan required precise coordination between multiple moving elements, each operating with different equipment and communication procedures. Jake found himself functioning as both intelligence coordinator and tactical mission commander, roles that required him to maintain situational awareness across all aspects of the operation while making real-time decisions that affected everyone involved.
The most challenging moment came when one of the assault teams encountered unexpected resistance that threatened to compromise their approach to the hostage location. Jake's electronic surveillance revealed that enemy forces were repositioning to surround the assault team, creating a tactical situation that required immediate intervention to prevent casualties.
Ranger Team 2, this is Mission Control. Enemy forces are moving to surround your position.
Recommend immediate extraction to secondary assault position. Jake transmitted, providing tactical guidance based on his unique access to enemy communications.
Negative mission control.
We can push through to the objective, came the response from the Ranger team leader, reflecting the aggressive tactical philosophy that was characteristic of Ranger operations. Jake faced a command decision that illustrated the complexity of leading diverse special operations forces.
The Ranger team leader was more experienced and senior in rank, but Jake had access to intelligence information that clearly indicated the proposed course of action would likely result in casualties. Colonel Mitchell had given him tactical coordination authority, but exercising that authority to overrule a senior Ranger officer required professional courage and confidence in his own judgment.
Ranger Team 2, this is Mission Control with direct order. Enemy communications indicate prepared ambush positions along your current route.
Execute immediate extraction to secondary position. SEAL Team 5 will provide covering fire during your movement. Jake transmitted, making a command decision that prioritized mission success and personnel safety over deference to seniority.
The intervention proved successful. Jake's SEALs provided effective covering fire while the Rangers withdrew from what electronic surveillance confirmed was indeed a prepared ambush position.
The tactical situation was resolved without casualties, and the mission continued toward successful completion of all objectives. As the complex exercise concluded, Jake experienced a sense of professional accomplishment that was different from anything he had felt during previous training or deployments. He had successfully coordinated a multi-unit special operations mission involving dozens of personnel from different branches and specialties. More importantly, he had made command decisions under pressure that balanced tactical considerations with personnel safety while achieving mission objectives.
And, personnel safety.
The after-action review that followed was the most comprehensive analysis Jake had ever experienced. Colonel Mitchell had monitored every aspect of the operation through multiple communication channels and surveillance systems, providing her with detailed data about decision-making processes, communication effectiveness, and tactical execution throughout the exercise.
Her presentation covered not just what had happened during the mission, but why specific decisions had been effective or problematic, and how similar situations might be handled in real-world operations.
She analyzed communication patterns between different units, evaluated the effectiveness of various tactical approaches, and identified lessons learned that could be applied in future missions.
What impressed Jake most about Colonel Mitchell's analysis was her focus on leadership development, rather than just mission evaluation. She identified specific moments when different officers had demonstrated growth in their command capabilities, noted examples of effective collaboration between units with different operational cultures, and highlighted innovations in tactical problem-solving that had emerged during the exercise.
Lieutenant Morrison's performance as intelligence coordinator and tactical mission commander demonstrates significant development in multi-unit leadership capabilities, she noted during her presentation. His ability to balance input from different specialties while maintaining focus on mission objectives reflects growing maturity in senior leadership decision-making.
The positive feedback was gratifying, but Jake recognized that Colonel Mitchell's assessment also identified areas where his leadership skills needed continued development.
She noted opportunities where he could have communicated more effectively with units that had different operational preferences, situations where he could have anticipated tactical complications earlier in the planning process, and moments when he could have been more decisive in exercising his command authority. As the afternoon progressed, teams participated in specialized training rotations designed to develop specific capabilities that had been identified during the morning's exercise. Jake's rotation focused on interagency communication protocols and coalition warfare techniques, skills that would be essential for senior special operations officers who worked with diverse military and civilian organizations.
The training revealed layers of complexity in special operations leadership that Jake had never fully appreciated.
Effective collaboration with different military services required understanding their organizational cultures, operational priorities, and communication styles. Working with civilian agencies introduced additional challenges related to legal authorities, information sharing restrictions, and coordination procedures that differed significantly from military protocols.
Colonel Mitchell's instruction during these specialized sessions demonstrated her comprehensive understanding of the broader special operations environment. She had clearly worked extensively with intelligence agencies, foreign military partners, and civilian emergency response organizations.
Her teaching drew on real-world experiences that illustrated both successful collaboration and lessons learned from coordination failures. Special operations success increasingly depends on your ability to work effectively with partners who don't share your training background or operational culture. She explained during one session. This is the book, it's about history. Her teaching drew on real-world experiences that those houses, the tactical skills that make you effective within your own unit are necessary, but not sufficient for senior leadership positions that require coordination across multiple organizations.
Jake began to understand that Colonel Mitchell was preparing selected personnel for advancement to positions where they would be responsible for much more than leading small tactical teams.
The skills she was teaching were designed for officers who would command large, diverse organizations or serve in staff positions where they would coordinate between different military services and civilian agencies. The realization was both exciting and daunting.
Jake had always focused on becoming the best possible SEAL team leader, but Colonel Mitchell was challenging him to think about a military career that extended far beyond tactical operations. She was suggesting that his leadership potential could be developed to levels where he could contribute to national security at strategic rather than just tactical levels.
As the third day of training concluded, Jake found himself reflecting on how dramatically his perspective on military leadership had evolved during his time at the facility. 3 days earlier, he had been confident in his abilities but limited in his understanding of what effective leadership really required.
Colonel Mitchell had systematically challenged every assumption he had made about command authority, tactical expertise, and professional development. More importantly, she had demonstrated that true military leadership was about much more than tactical competence or physical courage. It required intellectual flexibility, emotional intelligence, cultural awareness, and the wisdom to recognize when others possessed knowledge that could enhance mission success. These were qualities that could be developed through study and practice, but only if officers were willing to acknowledge their limitations and commit themselves to continuous learning.
The evening's final briefing included an announcement that would frame the remaining days of training.
Colonel Mitchell explained that the exercises planned for the rest of the week would focus specifically on preparing selected personnel for advancement to senior leadership positions within the special operations community. The skills required for tactical excellence are different from those needed for strategic leadership, she noted.
The remaining exercises will challenge you to think beyond individual unit performance toward broader organizational effectiveness and interagency coordination. Jake realized that he was being evaluated not just for his current performance but for his potential to assume significantly greater responsibilities in future assignments.
The training ahead would determine whether he possessed the intellectual capability and leadership maturity needed for advancement to positions where he would be responsible for the success of much larger organizations and more complex missions. The opportunity was exactly what Jake had always hoped for in his military career, but it came with the recognition that achieving his goals would require continued growth in areas he had never previously considered.
Colonel Mitchell had shown him that leadership development was a career-long process that demanded intellectual humility, continuous learning, and the courage to accept increasingly challenging responsibilities.
As he prepared for the fourth day of training, Jake felt both excitement and determination.
The lessons ahead would test whether he possessed not just the tactical skills of an elite warrior, but the wisdom and maturity of a future military leader.
The fourth day began with an exercise unlike anything Jake had experienced in his military career. Instead of tactical operations or combat scenarios, Colonel Mitchell had arranged for a strategic planning simulation.
that would test participants' ability to think about special operations challenges at the national security level rather than just tactical implementation.
Teams were divided into working groups representing different government agencies and military services, each tasked with developing comprehensive responses to a complex international crisis that involved multiple threat vectors and competing political considerations. Jake found himself assigned to represent Navy Special Warfare interests in a planning group that included Army Special Operations Command, Air Force Special Operations, Central Intelligence Agency, and State Department personnel.
The scenario Colonel Mitchell had developed was remarkably sophisticated, incorporating realistic political constraints, resource limitations, and intelligence gaps that characterized actual national security decision-making. The simulated crisis involved a terrorist organization that had taken control of critical infrastructure in an allied nation,
created a humanitarian disaster affecting thousands of civilians, and threatened to destabilize an entire region through their actions.
What made the exercise particularly challenging was its requirement that participants consider factors far beyond tactical military operations, diplomatic relationships with foreign governments, domestic political considerations, international legal frameworks, and media management all played crucial roles in developing effective response strategies.
Jake quickly realized that his tactical expertise, while valuable, represented only one small component of the comprehensive planning required at this level. Colonel Mitchell's role in the exercise was subtle but crucial.
Rather than providing direct guidance, she served as a facilitator who ensured that working groups considered all relevant factors and maintained focus on achievable objectives. Her questions pushed participants to think beyond their own organizational perspectives and consider how their proposed actions would affect other agencies and stakeholders.
How does your proposed special operations approach support broader diplomatic efforts to resolve this crisis? She asked Jake's working group during one planning session. What unintended consequences might result from the military actions you're recommending?
How would you measure success beyond just tactical objectives? These questions forced Jake to think about special operations planning in ways he had never considered before. He had always focused on mission accomplishment and force protection, but Colonel Mitchell was challenging him to consider how tactical decisions affected strategic objectives and long-term U.S. First Amendment
interests. The planning process revealed the complexity of coordination between different government agencies, each with their own priorities, capabilities, and constraints.
The CIA representatives emphasized intelligence collection and covert action capabilities, but had concerns about operational security and protecting intelligence sources. State Department personnel focused on diplomatic solutions and worried about how military actions might complicate ongoing negotiations with foreign governments.
Jake's military colleagues from other services brought their own perspectives and capabilities to the planning process. Army Special Operations offered extensive experience in working with foreign military partners and conducting extended operations in denied territory. Jake's second session.
Air Force Special Operations provided unique capabilities in long-range transportation, communications, and precision strike operations.
Developing consensus among such diverse stakeholders required exactly the kind of collaborative leadership skills that Colonel Mitchell had been teaching throughout the week. Jake found himself drawing on lessons learned from commanding mixed units during previous exercises, but applying them to much higher-level strategic planning where the stakes and complexity were dramatically greater.
The working group's first attempt at developing a comprehensive response plan revealed significant gaps in Jake's understanding of interagency coordination. His initial proposal focused heavily on direct military action, with other agencies providing supporting roles. The CIA representatives quickly pointed out that his approach would compromise ongoing intelligence operations and potentially eliminate valuable sources of information about the terrorist organization.
State Department personnel explained that the aggressive military approach Jake was advocating would complicate diplomatic efforts to build coalition support for the U.S.
response and might actually strengthen the terrorist organization by allowing them to portray themselves as victims of American imperialism. These were considerations that had never factored into Jake's tactical planning experience, but they were crucial at the strategic level.
Colonel Mitchell observed these discussions without intervening directly, but Jake noticed that her occasional questions helped guide the working group toward more comprehensive thinking. She didn't tell them what to conclude, but she ensured that they considered all relevant perspectives before making planning decisions.
Lieutenant Morrison, how does your special operations background inform your assessment of the risks and benefits associated with different response options? She asked during one particularly challenging planning session.
The question forced Jake to articulate not just what special operations forces could accomplish, but what limitations and potential complications might result from different tactical approaches. He had to consider how SEAL capabilities compared with other military options, what conditions would be necessary for mission success,
and how special operations activities would be coordinated with broader government efforts.
His response demonstrated how much his thinking had evolved during the week of training. Instead of advocating for the most aggressive possible military response, Jake found himself recommending a phased approach that began with intelligence collection and diplomatic pressure, escalated gradually through various levels of military involvement, and retained special operations forces for specific tactical objectives that supported broader strategic goals.
The collaborative planning process that followed was both intellectually challenging and professionally rewarding. Jake's working group developed a comprehensive response strategy that integrated military capabilities with diplomatic initiatives, intelligence operations, and humanitarian assistance efforts. Each component of their plan supported the others, creating a coordinated approach that addressed both immediate tactical requirements and long-term strategic objectives.
Colonel Mitchell's assessment of the working group's plan was thorough and insightful.
She analyzed not just the strategic logic of their proposed approach, but the feasibility of coordination between different agencies and the realistic timeline for implementation given bureaucratic and political constraints. Your plan demonstrates good integration of different agency capabilities and realistic assessment of political limitations, she noted during the presentation phase.
Areas for improvement include more detailed contingency planning for scenarios where initial diplomatic efforts fail, and better anticipation of how adversaries might adapt their tactics in response to your actions. The feedback was exactly what Jake had come to expect from Colonel Mitchell: honest, specific, and focused on professional development rather than just performance evaluation.
She had identified strengths in their planning approach while pointing out areas where their strategic thinking needed further refinement. The afternoon brought a different kind of challenge that would test Jake's leadership development in an entirely new way. Colonel Mitchell announced that selected personnel would participate in individual assessment exercises designed to evaluate their readiness for advancement to senior leadership positions within the special operations community. Jake's individual assessment took place in Colonel Mitchell's private office, a space that reflected her comprehensive professional background. The walls were lined with books on military history, strategic planning, leadership theory, and international relations. Citations and commendations from multiple deployments were displayed alongside photographs that documented her service in various combat theaters. The assessment began with Colonel Mitchell asking Jake to reflect on his own leadership development during the week of training. Rather than testing his knowledge of specific facts or procedures, she was evaluating his ability to engage in honest self-assessment and articulate lessons learned from challenging experiences. What assumptions about leadership have been challenged during this week's exercises? She asked, beginning a conversation that would prove more revealing than any written examination.
Jake found himself discussing how his understanding of effective command had evolved from emphasizing aggressive confidence toward valuing collaborative decision-making and continuous learning. He described how his initial assumptions about Colonel Mitchell herself had been wrong, and how those mistakes had taught him about the dangers of making judgments based on incomplete information or personal biases.
Colonel Mitchell listened intently to his responses, occasionally asking follow-up questions that pushed him to think more deeply about specific experiences and their implications for his future development as a military leader. Her questions were designed not just to assess his current capabilities, but to evaluate his potential for continued growth in increasingly challenging assignments. Based on this week's experiences, how would you approach commanding a unit that included personnel from different military services or civilian agencies? She asked,
testing his ability to apply lessons learned to hypothetical future situations.
Jake's response drew on specific examples from the week's exercises, describing how he would establish clear communication protocols, invest time in understanding different organizational cultures, and create planning processes that leveraged each group's unique capabilities while building consensus around shared objectives.
The conversation continued for over an hour, covering topics that ranged from tactical decision-making under pressure to strategic planning considerations for complex international operations. Colonel Mitchell's questions revealed her comprehensive understanding of the challenges facing senior military leaders, and her assessment provided Jake with insights into areas where his professional development needed continued focus.
As the individual assessment concluded, Colonel Mitchell shared her overall evaluation of Jake's performance and potential for advancement within the special operations community. Her feedback was both encouraging and challenging, recognizing significant growth in his leadership capabilities while identifying specific areas where continued development would be necessary for success in senior positions.
You've demonstrated impressive adaptability and learning capacity during this week's training, she noted. Your ability to function effectively in unfamiliar leadership roles and build consensus among diverse personnel suggests strong potential for advancement to positions involving greater responsibility. But she also identified areas where Jake's development needed continued attention.
His tactical expertise was excellent,
but his understanding of strategic planning and interagency coordination required further development through education and practical experience. His leadership instincts were sound, but he needed more exposure to the political and bureaucratic challenges that affected military operations at higher organizational levels.
I'm recommending you for advanced professional military education and assignment to a joint staff position where you'll have opportunities to work with personnel from different services and civilian agencies, Colonel Mitchell concluded. These experiences will prepare you for the kind of senior leadership responsibilities that your performance this week suggests you're capable of handling. The recommendation represented exactly the kind of career opportunity that Jake had always hoped to receive. But it came with the recognition that achieving his goals would require continued hard work and intellectual growth in areas beyond tactical operations.
Colonel Mitchell had identified his potential, while also making clear that realizing that potential would require sustained effort over many years. The final group session of the week brought all participants together for a comprehensive review of lessons learned and guidance for continued professional development. Colonel Mitchell's presentation covered not just the specific exercises they had completed, but the broader principles of military leadership that she had been teaching throughout their time together. Effective leadership in special operations requires more than tactical competence and physical courage, she explained to the assembled personnel.
It demands intellectual flexibility, emotional intelligence, cultural awareness, and the wisdom to recognize when others possess knowledge that can enhance mission success. Her words reflected exactly the lessons that Jake had learned through his own experiences during the week. Colonel Mitchell had systematically challenged every assumption he had made about leadership while providing opportunities to practice new capabilities in increasingly challenging scenarios. As the formal training concluded, Jake approached Colonel Mitchell one final time to express his appreciation for the educational experience she had provided. Their conversation was brief but meaningful, reflecting the professional relationship that had developed despite their initial misunderstanding. "Thank you for the learning opportunity, ma'am," Jake said, his tone reflecting genuine respect and gratitude.
"This week has changed my understanding of what military leadership really requires." Colonel Mitchell smiled, and for the first time during their interactions, Jake saw warmth and genuine satisfaction in her expression. "You've demonstrated impressive growth, Lieutenant."
"I look forward to hearing about your continued development as you take on greater responsibilities." As Jake packed his equipment and prepared to return to his regular unit, he reflected on how dramatically his perspective on military service had changed during the week of training. He had arrived at the facility confident in his abilities, but limited in his understanding of what effective leadership really required. Colonel Mitchell had systematically expanded his horizons while providing practical experience in the kind of challenges he would face as he advanced to positions of greater responsibility. More importantly, she had demonstrated through her own example that true military leadership was characterized not by loud confidence or aggressive dominance, but by quiet competence, continuous learning, and the wisdom to bring out the best in others. These were qualities that Jake could develop through study and practice, but only if he remained committed to intellectual humility and continuous professional growth. The most lasting lesson from the week came not from any specific tactical technique or leadership principle, but from the recognition that his initial assumptions about Colonel Mitchell had been completely wrong. She had taught him that making judgments based on incomplete information or personal biases wasn't just professionally embarrassing, it was potentially dangerous in military operations where lives depended on accurate assessment of people and situations. As Jake's transportation arrived to take him back to his home base, he realized that his education in military leadership had really just begun. Colonel Mitchell had provided him with foundational principles and practical experience, but applying those lessons effectively would require years of continued learning and development. The opportunity was both exciting and daunting, representing everything he had always wanted from his military career while making clear that achieving his goals would require sustained effort and intellectual growth. 6 months later, Jake received notification of his acceptance into the prestigious Defense Advanced Leadership Program, an assignment to a joint staff position at Special Operations Command Headquarters. The recommendation letter that accompanied his selection was signed by Colonel Mitchell, who had apparently continued to track his professional development and advocate for his advancement. Reading her assessment of his potential for senior leadership positions, Jake was reminded once again of the lessons she had taught about the difference between confidence and competence,
between loud authority and quiet effectiveness.
Her influence on his career would continue for years to come, but more importantly, her example of principled leadership would shape his approach to command throughout his military service. The cocky young SEAL who had made assumptions about a female officer's capabilities had been transformed into a more mature leader who understood that true strength often came from unexpected sources and that the most powerful lessons were sometimes taught by the quietest voices. It was an education that would serve him well as he continued his journey toward becoming the kind of leader that America's Special Operations Forces needed,
for the challenges ahead.